The forest was eerily silent, the kind of silence that made a soldier's instincts scream in warning. Sergeant Daniel Blake had been patrolling the outskirts of an abandoned village, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his boots crunching softly on the damp earth. The war had turned this once thriving land into a graveyard of trees, their trunks charred from past battles, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. As he made his way through the thick underbrush, a strange sound caught his attention, a low, weak whimper. It was almost lost in the wind, but it was there. Daniel froze. His training kicked in immediately. Sound in an empty forest could mean a lot of things. An injured animal, a wounded soldier, or worse, a trap. He scanned the area, his sharp eyes searching for movement. But there was nothing. Just trees, shadows, and that pitiful whimper. Cautiously, he moved toward the sound, his hand resting on his knife. As he rounded a cluster of thick bushes, his breath hitched. There, chained to a tree, was a wolf. The animal was massive, even in its weakened state. Its fur, once a proud silver grey, was now caked in dirt and dried blood. The thick chain wrapped around its neck had dug into its skin, leaving raw, painful wounds. Its ribs jutted out, evidence of days, maybe weeks, without proper food. But it was the wolf's eyes that stopped Daniel in his tracks. Golden, fierce, but not wild with rage. The wolf wasn't attacking, it wasn't snarling or lunging at him. It just stared at him, breathing heavily, too weak to fight, yet still unwilling to give up. Daniel's mind raced. Who would chain a wolf here? Was it a hunter's trap, or something worse? He glanced around, searching for any sign of the person who had done this, but the forest remained eerily empty. Something about the wolf's gaze unsettled him. There was intelligence behind those eyes, a silent plea. Daniel hesitated. He had seen enough suffering in this war, enough cruelty. But this felt different. Daniel crouched down slowly, keeping a safe distance. The wolf's ears twitched, but it made no move to attack. It simply watched him, as if trying to understand his intentions. "You're in a bad spot, huh?" Daniel murmured. His voice was low, steady, the same voice he used when calming down panicked soldiers under fire. The wolf didn't respond, of course, but its breathing slowed slightly. Daniel's eyes traveled to the chain. It was thick, rusted, and locked with an old but sturdy padlock. Whoever had tied the wolf here hadn't planned on letting it go. "Who did this to you?" he muttered, more to himself than to the wolf. He looked around again, this time noticing faint footprints in the dirt. They led away from the tree, disappearing into the forest. Someone had left the wolf here to die. Daniel exhaled sharply. He knew he shouldn't get involved. He had a mission, orders to follow. But something about this felt wrong. His fingers moved to the knife strapped to his belt. The wolf tensed. "I'm not here to hurt you," Daniel assured, keeping his movements slow. He knew one wrong move could turn this fragile moment into a fight he didn't want. He reached for his canteen and poured a small puddle of water onto the ground. The wolf's nose twitched, and despite its exhaustion, it took a slow step forward, lapping at the water. Good. It was desperate enough to take help. Taking a deep breath, Daniel shifted closer and inspected the chain. His knife wouldn't be enough. He needed to break the lock. But before he could decide how to do that, the wolf let out a low, warning growl. Daniel froze. Behind him, a branch snapped. Instinct took over. Daniel spun around, his hand flying to his rifle. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. But there was nothing. Just the forest, the wind, the distant rustling of leaves. Slowly he turned back to the wolf. It was still watching him, but its ears were now alert, listening. "You heard it too, didn't you?" Daniel murmured. For the first time in his life, he felt as if an animal actually understood him. Deciding not to waste more time, he focused on the lock. He pulled out his pistol and, with careful aim, fired a single shot. The lock shattered, The chain slackened. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wolf stood still, as if it couldn't believe it was finally free. Daniel took a slow step back. "Go on," he said, expecting it to run. But it didn't. Instead, the wolf collapsed. Daniel rushed forward instinctively, catching its massive head before it hit the ground. Up close, he could see the extent of its injuries. It had been beaten, starved, tortured. He pulled out some of his rations, dry biscuits, nothing fancy, and broke them into small pieces. The wolf barely sniffed before swallowing them whole. "That's all I got," Daniel said apologetically. The wolf, despite everything, licked his hand. Daniel stared, shocked. He had seen trained dogs show gratitude, but this was a wild animal, yet at that moment it felt like something else, like trust. That night, as Daniel made camp, the wolf didn't leave. It curled up near the fire, still weak, but no longer just a prisoner of fate. Over the next few days, Daniel and the wolf grew closer. He found himself talking to the animal, telling it stories about his past, his fears, and his dreams beyond the war. He named it Ghost, for the way it moved through the forest, silent and unseen. Ghost, in turn, protected Daniel, alerting him to danger, hunting small game to share, and standing guard at night. One night, as they rested in a hidden cave, a low growl rumbled in Ghost's throat. Daniel sat up instantly, gripping his rifle. The hunters had returned. This time, they weren't just looking for the wolf. They were looking for revenge. A brutal battle ensued, with Daniel and Ghost fighting side by side. Daniel took out 2 of the men, while Ghost tore through the others with primal fury. When the dust settled, the remaining hunters fled, leaving their weapons behind. Daniel knew it was time to leave. The war had taken enough from him. With Ghost by his side, he set off toward the mountains where a new life awaited, a life free from chains, both literal and figurative. As they disappeared into the horizon, Daniel realized something. The wolf hadn't been the one saved that day. He had.